Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Duncan Savage, one of South Africa's most exciting and celebrated winemakers. He's the founder of Savage Wines, based in Cape Town, where he crafts beautiful, elegant wines that really capture the coastal freshness and energy of South Africa. Duncan started out as the head winemaker at Cape Point Vineyards before launching his own label in 2011. And since then, he's become a leader in South Africa's new wave wine movement. I don't know about you, but my extent of knowledge and experience with South African wines really only goes as far as the big, bold Pinotage and these off-dry Chenin Blancs, and that's about it. And I have a feeling there is way more to it than that. So I can't wait to hear more about Duncan's winemaking philosophy as someone making wines with this amazing balance of purity and place, and also hearing from him what makes South African wine so special. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so glad we can get this interview in. You're the first South African winemaker I've had on the show.
Really?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so really, really excited to have you here. Well, the first question I always like to start with anybody in the wine world is, how did you fall in love with wine?
I told you I was technologically challenged. If I'd got a job in computers, I would have been in deep trouble. So I needed to find something that I could do. No, to be honest, it was an interesting journey. I mean, I don't have this long, illustrious family history in the wine industry. I'm first generation in the game. I studied viticulture and enology at a place in Stellenbosch, just outside of Stellenbosch in Cape Town. It's a super beautiful place. I just went there, thinking that, this was the practical option to do because I needed to learn, and I'd already studied a business degree that I crashed and burned in horribly. And it was just, it's crazy how it worked because when I was a student, we used to go out. There were these bars that we would go to, these under 18 bars. And obviously they didn't let you, because in South Africa, we can drink when we're 18, not like you guys in the States where you're all based in the States, eh? Just checking.
Yes. I'm based in Seattle in the States.
Okay, cool. Suddenly thought, shit, we've got to get that right. But,
no, you're right.
So we used to go to the local rugby field and drink this cheap 2-liter bottle of white wine called Autumn Harvest Crackling. That's absolutely horrendous. You sort of down these cups and gag. And then I sort of, after doing this a few times when I was 16 years old, I went home the one day when I was like, I don't know, 18 or just over 18. And my mom always used to drink a glass of red wine. And I said to my mom, Mom, you mind if I try that? So I had a quick sip of her wine. And after drinking that cheap, terrible stuff that we had drank for so long on the rugby field, anything that was in a glass was going to taste better. But she had a really lovely South African Cabernet. And, Stellenbosch in particular does very, very well with Cabernet. So I had a sip of this and promptly finished the glass. And it's amazing because it was just, I was hooked after that. And I went from, studying my business degree where I was, getting pissed with my mates in the bar every Friday, Saturday, whatever, to actually saving my student cash and buying bottles of wine. And I just kind of thought I'd end up in like a marketing role or something in the industry just because I just totally fell head over heels in love with it. And then I said to my dad one day, he was getting tired of paying for his dodgy son to fail his BCom because I was trying to study the economics of working less and surfing more. And then when I said to him one day that I wanted to go to farm college, he nearly fell over backwards and said, eventually, somehow, I don't know what happened, he actually said yes. And I went off to farm college and I had 3 of the greatest years of my life. I got to meet amazing farmers from all over South Africa, not all involved in grapes or wine, just people who are people of the soil. And I think that, we get there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in the wine industry and we get caught up in all the bullshit and that. But, actually at the end of the day, when you meet people, whether they grow grapes or whatever, on their piece of land, they understand their land. And it's interpreting that land that is such a key thing for all of us. So you can learn so much even from someone who has no idea how a grapevine grows. They understand how to interpret their soils and their site. And I think that was fantastic. But still at a time for us in South Africa, this was 2000. So people still had this idea that wine was made in the winery. So we did a lot of winery focused stuff and not a lot of vineyard focused stuff. And I'm glad that the industry's changed especially in the new world. A lot of the old world guys have had a strong vineyard focus for a long time. But if you look at what's happening viticulturally in the new world, there's this huge shift. And that's why we're seeing places like South Africa, ramp up on the quality side of things.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important to highlight. I love now that a lot of people say the wine starts in the vineyard. You can only make a good wine from good grapes, right? You have to start there. You could make a bad wine from good grapes, I suppose, but you're not going to make a good wine from bad grapes in that sense of things. And I think that's really great that's where we're looking toward. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. So can you take us through kind of your journey from, you went to school for viticulture and for farming, going from there, and then you worked as a winemaker at Cape Point Vineyards, and then starting your own project. How did that journey go for you?
Yeah, so coming out of Elsenburg, you started kind of trying to figure out what to go and do. And there's the temptation to go and work around the world doing harvests because it's such fun. Now, you work hard, but you have a great time. But I happened to get a job at Cape Point Vineyards straight off the bat, and I was very lucky because a friend of mine who's since passed away, the late winemaker of a farm called, for you Americans, a farm called Napa and Bordeaux. They actually changed their, which means beyond expectation in Africa. I think it's Dutch actually. But what they did was they realized that Americans wouldn't be able to pronounce it, so they just call their wine in the States, they call it Beyond.
That tracks. That makes sense.
Yeah. Anyway, I had no experience, and the owner of Cape Point was looking for someone with experience, and I'd sort of become friendly with a guy who was the winemaker at Napa and Bordeaux. And he told the owner that he should employ this young guy that was passionate and keen on the industry. And I only found this out 10 years after I'd been working at Cape Point. And he undertook with the owner that he would go and fix any problems or mistakes or anything that I made free of charge. He took a liking to me and wanted to promote me. And I was very lucky because I ended up, as a result of that, as head winemaker of a very new property, right up against the ocean. So if whoever listens to this or watches or whatever, if you look at a map of South Africa, there's this little peninsula that runs, this narrow little finger. We were sort of right at the bottom of that, surrounded by the ocean. And it's this, quite cutting edge site. So it was very cool for me. And also, obviously, which was the coolest part of it, was I love surfing. So I was paranoid I was going to get a job 100 kilometers from the beach. So here I get this job where the front gate's 3 kilometers to the beach. I was like, this is like this little golden pathway just opened for me. Anyway, needless to say, it was actually more of a curse than a blessing because, I was doing the vineyards and the wine and everything, and there were so many days we were so busy in the vineyards that I could see the waves. I could see it cooking. I could see the little foam ball where the guys were paddling in, and I just couldn't go. It was like,
it was a temptation. It was perfect to be there, except for you couldn't be out there.
Yeah, at least I was outside doing something cool. I wasn't sitting in an office somewhere or whatever. I was at least in nature in a beautiful setting. So it made it an easier one. And yes, so I was there for 14 years. And it was fantastic because it was like a blank canvas, new property. We had this opportunity, and the owner, he basically just said to me in the beginning, sink or swim. So kind of like gave me the opportunity, and it was fantastic. And we ran with it, and we made some lovely wines. But I think that, the wine industry, and it's not just unique to us here in South Africa. It's for everybody who makes wine or works with vineyards around the world. There's the emotional side of it. You become emotionally attached to the industry, the wines you make. It becomes very personal. And as a result, I knew from day one, I wanted to have my own business. I'm also ambitious. I wanted to do my thing. But, the barrier to entry in the game is obviously you need a bit of cash. And I didn't at the time. So, I did my 14 years at Cape Point. It opened many doors for me, introduced me to many people. You build up fantastic relationships. And then I left there in 2016 to start Savage Wines. I'd already been making small volumes of the Savage Wines while I was at Cape Point, but we properly got going after 2016 when I bought my own little winery. We our journey, our journeys not like a lot of these fancy pants wineries in Stellenbosch here in Cape Town. The guys measure their success by the length of their driveway. I don't even have a driveway. I've just got a shitty little industrial building in the middle of Cape Town. But, something that was very important to me because of that emotional, personal element as a first generation, it's easy. I'm sorry, I'm tend to digress from time to time, but we had a wine tasting with the Antinoris. Pierre Antinori was in South Africa a few years ago, and he stood up and he said, the old adage, many of you have heard it before, he was telling us how his daughters were the 21st generation in their family in wine. And then I don't know if it was Pierre that said it or someone from Bordeaux, but they always say winemaking is easy. It's only the first 300 years that are difficult. And I think that's kind of like for us in South Africa, when you're starting this new little business, you look at these illustrious estates that are not being built up with corporate money and being built up over time. It takes generations to do. And I didn't want to, I'm going to probably be dead in 30 years. So I want to do as much as I can as quickly as possible. So we didn't want to get any investors in the business. And I know people say I'm kind of sort of contradicting myself here because if you want to do things quickly, you need money. But because it's so personal and so emotional what we do, that I didn't want anyone telling me what to do. I didn't want to work for anyone. So we, scraped together whatever cash we could, bought this little industrial building in Salt River in Cape Town. They say to me, when people come from the UK, they say it was like what Shoreditch in London was like 50 years ago, when people used to like stab one another and stuff like that. I don't know what areas are dodgy where you come from, but I always paint this picture and people get a bit nervous, but it's actually pretty cool. It's a really interesting part of the city. And, if anyone listens to this who's been to Cape Town, they'll know it's a small city. It's an incredibly beautiful city. I look out my window and there's Table Mountain there. It's a colorful, interesting place, very diverse cultures and it's super cool. So we're in the hub of that. And COVID in a way was good to us because, it wasn't good to all our restaurant mates, unfortunately, but where it was good for us was that nobody was sitting at home and staring at the wall. Everyone was getting drunk. And, in the first part of COVID, they were drinking from in the afternoon was fine in the evenings. But, later on, people were pre-lunch, thinking, oh, shit, what are we going to pull now? A little pull a cork of something, So we sold a lot of wine in COVID and commercial property in Cape Town became cheap because everyone was working from home. So we've expanded our footprint now in the city. And one of the questions that I know you're going to ask it as well, but I'm sort of going to preempt it. Everyone asks us, why don't you own your own vineyards? Because that's a thing which happens a lot around the world. And I think a lot of people don't understand, every country has its own interesting dynamic. So if you look at, I've got friends who live in London, they work in the restaurant trade. They own a small vineyard, for example, in, say, Spain or something like that, half a hectare of old vines or whatever. You can go to Burgundy if you've got enough cash and you can buy one row in a vineyard if you want to. But the law allows for that. It's interesting because in Austria, there's parts of Austria now where it's become so broken up because of inheritance and that, leaving to multiple children, one row, half a row, whatever, that the government's trying to consolidate some of those vineyards now because it's become so fragmented. And for us in South Africa, we have the opposite. So we have an act called Act 70 of 1970, which I know this sounds very technical and in depth, and I'll give you a 1-minute rendition because otherwise everyone's going to fall asleep. So Act 70 of 1970 set out to protect what was deemed to be sustainable agricultural entities at the time. And back in 1970 in South Africa, we had a really dodgy past. We had apartheid. We had all kinds of things. Our wines were being controlled by a cooperative system. People needed big-sized farms to crop a lot of grapes that they were selling for low prices. And they needed that scale to survive. And the shift in the industry has now been from that commercial producer supplying a cooperative to small private producers like myself. So Stellenbosch used to have 7 cooperatives. It now has technically it's got technically 2, but one's on its way out. So it's technically only 1. So you can see how the shift in the industry has taken place, but nothing's changed. The act is still the same. So I cannot, if I want to own, one of my wines is called Follow the Line. I was there working that vineyard today. If I want to own Follow the Line, which is 2 hectares, I have to buy 450 hectares of land. If I want to own my leasehold in Stellenbosch, where I've got a 2.5 hectare leasehold on an extremely steep parcel, south facing, the most beautiful site. If I want to buy that 2.5 hectares, I have to buy 90 hectares of land to own that 2.5 hectares. So the way we do it is we lease all these parcels all over the show. We farm them like we own them, and we operate. But some of my leases are handshakes, some are 10 years. The ones we develop are 30-year leaseholds, and they're pretty solid. And the way I see it is, the option to renew is there, but in 30 years, like I said to you, I'm more than likely going to be dead. So, whatever happens after that, happens after that. If my kids want to get stuck in, they can get stuck in. But yeah, that's our dynamic. And in a way, it's quite cool because it's limiting that we can't own, but it gives us more scope to get involved in so many different parcels all over the show. So it's, in a way, quite exciting. And my plan is to buy land, but obviously I don't want to buy land for the sake of buying land. You have to buy the right land. And also my wines, I've got a Sunso from Darling, a Grenache from the Picaniche Kloof, Chenin from on the border of Paarl and the Stellies. We make lots of Syrah from Stellenbosch, from the Polkerdrij, which is that sort of south-facing maritime part of Stellenbosch. And I wouldn't be able to afford land in all these different places anyway. So by default, our range is already kind of, we painted ourselves into a corner, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I think that's such a great point of because I think in the US, there's this it almost adds something to the bottle if you can say oh, it's from estate grapes. You're saying oh, we own the land that the grapes came from. And I think a lot of people look at this and see it as oh, that means the wine's going to be better. But what you're saying as well is it's it's not like those grapes are bad, but it is limiting in that it's only on the land that you have, versus for you can kind of explore out beyond that and you can grab from these different parcels. And honestly, it's a little more exciting for me as somebody who loves trying, these different types of wine, having grapes from all over in it. And that's wild so I'm curious, who owns the land then? So for example, when you said if you wanted to get those 2.5 hectares for your follow the line wine, you'd have to buy 450. Is it still large corporations that are owning that? Is that farmers? How does that work? I love producing this podcast for you every week. But here's the truth. It's not free. That's why I'm so grateful for sponsors like the following brands supporting me so that I can share everything I love about wine with you. If you're able, show them some support back. Anyone else guilty of opening a bottle of wine for just one glass and then finding it a week later in the fridge totally undrinkable? Yeah, that used to happen to me all the time until I started using the VacuVin Wine Saver. It's so simple to use, easy to throw in my bag if I'm heading to a friend's, and it keeps wine fresh for up to 10 days, proven by independent lab testing. VacuVin invented the original wine saver back in 1986, and now over 40 million wine lovers around the world use it. With VacuVin, you get to enjoy wine on your terms. Open Italian red for Tuesday pasta night, and it'll taste just as good a week later with pizza. Go to us.vacuvin.com and use code CORKANDFIZZ for 20% off your first order.
Yeah, so it's farmers. But the farmers that own that land, the vast majority of that land is sheep and wheat. And, the vineyards are a very small portion of it. And I love to farm it. I like to farm grapes. The only sheep I want to look at is the lamb chop that's on my plate. I don't want to have eyeball a sheep, every day and look at this guy, because it's not, as they say, stick to your knitting. And for me to now buy this farm and then farm with wheat and sheep, it's going to take all my time and focus away from the vineyards. So a lot of the land's not that expensive. So it's not that the cost is the barrier to entry. What costs you money is owning that land, because that land needs to be maintained. It needs to be developed. You have a flash flood, roads. Look at the climate now. It's so unpredictable. You have a flash 100 mils of rain, your roads wash away. It costs you million rand to, I know million rand's only like $50, but not quite. It's not quite the same. But it still costs you a lot of money to fix the stuff, And I think that for us, we've been in a position now, because for South Africa's history, for people who might have been here and been to a wine farm, they might have noticed that it was like that. In Stellenbosch, it wasn't all about an estate, and you went up this long driveway with vineyards and fancy trees and all this stuff into this fancy Cape Dutch building, and went into the tasting room. And on the tasting list was everything from a Sauvignon to a Sauvignon Blanc to a flipping fortified port-style wine right at the bottom. The one-stop wine shop model was kind of the norm here. And what's happening is we're starting to, like the rest of the world, the old world obviously has a head start in this regard, but a lot of the world's obviously realizing that there's a reason stuff grows in certain places and does well. If you're going to plant Grenache, there's certain places Grenache thrives, other places not. Cabernet loves high solar radiation, loves warmer slopes, doesn't like the wind so much, not necessarily from a growth point of view, but just, you've got a lot of wind, you're going to have more green flavors, things like that. So we've cherry-picked sites. Our Grenache comes from the Piccaninny Kloof, which is the best place. It's 2 hours northwest of Cape Town. It's the best place for Grenache. So we're seeing that concept of regionality starting to take hold in South Africa, which is great. The land we've leased on this farm in the Polkadrai, this very steep Syrah vineyard, it's amazing. I mean, people think I'm nuts because, look, everyone in South Africa thinks I'm nuts because it's so steep. But when I go to the Mosel, I don't show anybody the photos because it looks flat compared to a lot of that stuff in the Mosel. And then I was just in Côte d'Ivoire recently. I was in the Northern Rhone with some mates, and I was in Côte d'Ivoire and also didn't show too many of those guys my photo because there were 1 or 2 vineyards that were quite steep there as well. But we've gone and developed land which is, 3 generations of farmer never wanted to develop because it was too steep. So there's a lot of that kind of thing happening in South Africa now, where there's a lot of these interesting old vineyards that disappeared into these co-ops our Chenin Blanc, the wine's name, is never been asked to dance because this wine had never been asked to dance. So the vineyard was planted in 1956 and it disappeared into a co-op for its whole life until we started bottling the wine. And it's the 4th oldest Chenin Blanc vineyard in South Africa. It's amazing. It's this majestic block with these beautiful vines. And you look at this and you think to yourself that, so we're discovering all these parcels, we're planting these new interesting sites. And it genuinely, I believe, because of this, we obviously in the know, and I'm obviously slightly biased, but it's like, I think South Africa is one of the most exciting wine destinations in the world at the moment because of this, Burgundy's Burgundy. We already know where everything is that's good. In fact, they are in a spot of bother at the moment with climate change because, they've spent a lot of their lives chasing the sun. All those Grand Cru slopes are how to catch as much sun as possible, a lot of them. We've spent our lives avoiding the sun. So climate change for us is actually, we kind of like already sort of adapted to all of this. And what's super interesting is, sorry, I know I'm rambling on here, but what's super interesting is we're very close to, what makes us viable is our proximity to the ocean. So the wind coming off the sea, and what we've seen with climate change in the last couple of years, our summer wind, which is the southeaster, has been a little bit more intense later in the season, and that's coming off the ocean. So what happens is, it depends where you are as to whether it's coming off the ocean, obviously, because the Cape has different areas. But when it blows at the base of the peninsula, you get this upwelling of cold water when it blows really hard and a lot. And the temperatures on the sea drop down to like 9 to 14 degrees, which is what makes it viable for us to grow grapes. We've recorded as low as 7 degrees in the ocean in the last year. And you can imagine it has this cooling effect on the vineyards. So we actually been experiencing a lot of cooler vintages where a lot of Europe is getting absolutely nailed by the heat. It's quite weird, but long may it last, hopefully. And yeah, so it's super cool. And just to give you an idea, if you're in Stellenbosch, and that's what people don't understand about Cape Town, is if you're in Stellenbosch and it can be 36 degrees on a day, and you get in your car and you drive from Stellenbosch to Cape Point where I used to work, it'll take you 1 hour to drive there. In that 1 hour, you can drop from 36 degrees to 21 degrees, sometimes 19 degrees, just because of proximity to the ocean and a very cold Atlantic. It's incredible.
Yeah. And I feel like it talks a lot about the different styles of wine that can be made in South Africa, which I feel like is a good leeway into the next question, which was just about, I think for a lot of people listening to this, if they're not, they might not be very familiar with South African wines. I'm thinking about like, at least even here in Seattle, which is, big city in the US, most of what we see is, big, bold Pinotage and then like off-dry Chenin Blanc. And those are pretty much the only ones that I've really seen much around here. And that's all I think about. And for a lot of folks, they may have actually never tried South African wine. So you've talked a lot about it. And I'm just going to ask you to start with, can you give us just like a little intro to winemaking in South Africa or to the region? I know it's a big ask, but just kind of like give folks an idea of what they could expect from South African wine.
Yeah, so it's maritime, it's mountainous, it's hilly. There's loads of different aspects. It's, there's so many facets to what we have here, which is fantastic, as I said earlier. But what's interesting about South Africa, like I said, is the dynamic with the ocean is what gives us this opportunity to grow, obviously, a number of different varieties. It's not limited to just one variety. We have in the past been limited by varieties because we didn't have a lot of all the different grapes that exist around the world. You know, if you look at Italy, Italy has up to, I think someone said to me they've got 1,200 grape. I don't even think the Italians know what the hell's going on in terms of grape varieties. We were limited to what was commercially popular and interesting. And Cabernet, Chardonnay, even in South Africa, only came in the 80s. So it's not got a long history here. Sauvignon Blanc, Merlot. We've seen is that South Africa is now changing from this commercially driven varietal focus to things that genuinely work. We've seen Picpoul, Petit Manseng, Counoir. There's a huge amount of work with Grenache, Cinsault, things like that that are doing so well in South Africa. Chenin is incredible. People have started planting Assyrtiko. So I think what happened back in the past was people were working with those sort of more commercial varieties and then varieties like Pinotage, which is unique to South Africa. And I think that what a lot of guys were swayed with in the past was wine was made in the winery, number one, so the vineyard focus wasn't always there. Number two, they were trying to copy a lot of the Bordeaux model, some of the guys in the early days. So there were a lot of new oak, big, bold sort of wines, lots of extract. And what you can see now is people starting to take a foot off the pedal a little bit, starting to understand their terroir more, starting to realize that, you know, on this little slope, even if you try and extract, it's not going to be there. So just take your foot off the gas and relax, let the wine do its thing. And we're starting to see this interesting sort of dynamic in terms of styles. That concept, as I said earlier, of regionality is fantastic. So I know it confuses the living daylights out of everyone because, you know, now I'm talking about the Polka Dry and the Picaniche Kloof and all these places that you guys don't understand the names or pronounce. But it all takes time. You know, the message slowly but surely has to be put across. So the state of Chenin in South Africa now, I can tell you right now, there's very few off-dry styles. Dry, clean, pure. It's the most beautiful variety. It's extremely versatile from dry styles to enobolate. It's amazing. It's an old workhorse in South Africa. We've got this multitude of old Chenin vineyards that people started discovering years ago and realizing that these old parcels are just incredible. You know, Pinotage, the style that's been made for many years, people are starting to make these lighter, fresher, more vibrant styles. I promise you, Pinotage wasn't done any favors by a lot of producers in the past, but I can pour you Pinotages now. If you have that preconceived idea of Pinotage in your mind, you'll probably be a bit nervous. But if you taste the wine blind, it'll blow your mind. It'll freak you out when you see that it's actually Pinotage. And I think it's just, as I say, it's a farming, winemaking dynamic. And I mean, I suppose I'm not really like, I should have given you a very concise, like, this is why South Africa is what it is. But I can't because it's like, you know, it's this whole thing that's constantly evolving. So you will see, I think, going forward, a lot more interest in South African wine, I think, in the States. You know, I think that, you know, back in the day, people used to just associate us with apartheid and poverty and all of that. And none of that kind of links to, you know, wine, which is essentially a luxury product. But more and more people are visiting South Africa, and especially for the game parks, and a lot of Americans in particular. I mean, there's a lot of direct flights now. If you come up to the game parks in the north, either the northwest or the northeast, people are blown away. You drive your car around and there's lions strolling around, you know, smoking a little buck down there, or you know, elephants everywhere. There's a few less rhinos, compliments of our friends in China. But, you know, other than that, it's the most incredible thing. And you know what it's like. Even if you love Burgundy, until you've actually been to Burgundy, you don't really understand it. You know, once you've been there, you understand it. And South Africa is the same. People must come, and it's a beautiful place. The climate is great. The people are warm and friendly. You will be blown away by the hospitality. I think all of that together is what's giving us our success today is, you know, like discovering these old vines, new plantings, new slopes, the gears of the people. I have to give you this example. Sorry, I'm not rambling on again, but we did a tasting in Quebec, 4 of us, producers here in South Africa, flew across. We got a great importer there, the guys from Symbiosa. They're such lacquer guys. And we were on a rooftop bar, and they'd set us up with 4 stations. So I don't know if you know of the wines from Badenhorst. He's a friend of mine, Artie Badenhorst. He makes the Secatiers Chenin Blanc. Very good wine. Maybe you've seen it before. Artie's quite a character, loves to smoke, big beard. And we know what Artie's like. He just sort of disappears. So the 4 of us get onto the rooftop, and we look at all these separate tables, and we're like, bugger this. We push all the tables together, chuck everyone's wines in the same ice bucket, pour each other's wines, tell each other's stories. And a whole bunch of people came to us afterwards. And one guy said to me, he said, you know, he's been in the trade in Quebec in Montreal for 30 years. And he said he's never seen a producer pouring other producers' wines. And I think that kind of summed up for me the spirit of South Africa and the sort of like help each other dynamic. Because, we first need to promote South Africa to get people to buy into the concept that is South Africa. And when they do that, they will buy the wines and they'll drink the wines and they'll enjoy the wines.
Yes, which honestly is so interesting that you were in Quebec too, because I feel like I spoke to a Canadian winemaker recently, and they kind of said a similar thing of like, it's that same idea of like, we need to have, people who are outside of the country be able to try our wines and realize that we are a wine region that makes incredible wines, and whatever idea they have, or if they have no idea, we need to show them, and that needs to be done not just with your own wines. It's like you need to be the spokesperson for everyone's wines is so important. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I highly encourage you to look out for Duncan's wines. You can find Savage wines most likely at a smaller wine store. So reach out to your small wine shops and ask them if they can get in any Savage wines. I know I will be doing that, so I can give them a try. And even if you can't find Savage wines, even just like he said, shouting out other winemakers and looking for other South African wines, just so we can get these wines in the market, especially in the US, Canada, and areas outside of South Africa. If you love this episode as much as I did, I'd love it if you could take a quick second, rate it, and leave a review. And if you know a wine lover in your life that would enjoy it, please share it with them. In next week's episode, you'll hear part 2 of my interview with Duncan. You are not going to want to miss this. He shares more about his winemaking style. He also shares some more stories behind the names of his wines, which I think are just so fun. And he shares a very unique and special to South Africa food and wine pairing that I think you'll want to hear. Thanks again for listening. And if you want to learn more about wine, come follow me at Cork and Fizz on Instagram. Cheers!